who hasn't yet got a copy of Vanity or the Street Porter book, the Street Porter being the collection of essays from the Summer Institute, please come and see me, and I'd be happy to give you a copy. And you can see more of what's been done at the Summer Institute over the years. Good pleasure. This is a book of essays that were collected from the first 5 Summer Institutes, and then this is some work that also appeared or was first presented by David and me at the Summer Institute over various years. So,
nobody else was there to write papers.
Those presentations were at least as coherent as the one that you heard earlier this year. Let me just say it's a great pleasure to have Michael speaking to us. He has helped us over the years with the Summer Institute at George Mason, and we've often wanted to get him in front of the crowd, and so now here he is. Michael has just obtained his PhD from George Mason University and is now at Utah State, soon will be at Utah State, and he's going to speak to us about Smith in the context of order.
Well, thank you very much. So this is the appropriate place to talk about what I want to talk about today. And I'm going to talk also about that. This comes out of a chapter in my dissertation, which I've kind of broken down, tried to do a little bit more detail in. I'm here to maybe walk through the arguments that I'm thinking about in comments with you guys. So I appreciate it. Smith in the context of order. So here's the roadmap. What I'm going to argue is that when we look at Smith and usury, that most of the people that read the usury debate read it in terms of how do we defend Smith against the attack of Jerry Bentham, are the points that Bentham raises. So what has come out of that literature is that Smith is working with external effects, and he's also working with coherent moral philosophy, which I think is an important point that comes out of looking at the usury debate. What I think is missing is an analysis of Bentham's hero. This is Marcus Curtius, who was mentioned in the Defense of Usury, specifically in the letter that's addressed to Smith. And I'm going to try to convince you, that Bentham not only recognizes Smith's system, but also uses sympathy in order to construct an idea of social reform. So I'm going to then talk about impacts and insights on my interpretation of the usury debate. All right, so the existing scholarship, at least my 2 favorite pieces, are the people in this room. And Paganelli has shown that Smith is working with a unique context, a medium. So this is like the median or something that's not dealing with extremes. So when you venture out on the extremes, you get into trouble. So the idea is that there's a centered balance to Smith's philosophy. And the other paper that I think is really important is looking at the role of gambles in sympathy. What happens if you look at gambles when you add sympathy, small or large gambles? So here's a prisoner's dilemma. And we see that this is vector rewards. It's augmented for approbation. And what happens when you have a very small gamble is that I see that we're both in this together. We're working together. I appreciate your cooperation. This provides an incentive for further cooperation. You can actually get out of the prisoner's dilemma, in a sense, by adding approbation into the cooperative problem. But when you have a really large gamble, that messes up the approbation mechanism, because the person who wins the gamble might receive attention and approbation and feelings from other people in society. Therefore, they have an incentive to affect at least as much as in a normal prisoner's dilemma, if not more. All right, so if projectors in Adam Smith are taking a big gamble in order to move social rank, then this would fit within that context that is developed in that paper. Now, what the reading of Smith is see systematic bias. And so what I like, in my head, I think about is the fundamental attribution error, that other people fail just because they're the kind of people who fail. And I'm particularly good at ego, which means that I'll be successful and I can get through. If I get funds to do my project and it'll be successful, I'll get to pay that. Therefore, I'm willing to pay a much higher interest rate for loans. So if there's a systematic bias where people are willing to, that they overestimate their chances of success, systematically you get into something like the winner's curse, where the people that win the bidding for scarce capital resources actually crowd out all the other people that are bidding in the capital market. So what happens here is the crowding out, the replacement of good investments with bad investments distorts the capital structure, and you get a misallocation of capital, which will reduce long-term growth rates in the sense that you have to recover from the misallocation of capital over time, and the growth is actually much less than it would otherwise be. So this seems to be a real problem in the sense that we're worried about creating rules that would maintain stability in society in order to prevent these sort of systematic errors from affecting the allocation capital and the growth rate. And what Paganelli calls this is the Keynes-like interpretation. The Keynes reading back into Smith, sort of reading this interpretation of Smith's, his research. So what we have is a benefit of stability, that I think is pretty clear in the existing literature. And this basically takes Bentham's having an error. So Bentham's reading of Smith just doesn't appreciate the misallocation of resources here and how severe it is. So another point I wanted to raise is that Bentham's letter goes in 1787. This is prior to the 6th edition, just to talk about all the changes in the 6th edition we talked about today. It's not clear to me that Smith couldn't have acknowledged that Bentham made an argument, and then when he did the 6th edition of Theory of Moral Sentiment, still put in stuff about lotteries and the type of sympathetic structures that he's got there without ever accounting for Bentham's point. So there's no reply, basically, is what I'm saying, from Smith to Bentham on points that Bentham raises. All right, so if we have Smith, who has this lottery idea, and then there's a systematic bias which distorts the lottery, then we have Bentham's invention lottery. And basically the way that I see this being read in the literature is that there's a lot of good stuff out there. If you give money to more and more people and they try their unique ideas, and they try a bunch of different things, and they might happen upon one of the good things that doesn't currently exist in society. This is sort of an invention lottery. So just by having more people participate in the process, you might stumble on something good. So I think that's sort of the way that the invention lottery is read. So in summary, the existing literature puts Smith in a camp of being coherent, because he's providing a role that accounts for stability in the system. So this brings up, does Smith just simply miss, does Bentham simply miss Smith's larger coherence? If so, then the existing literature is correct. But what I want to ask now is how can we read Bentham with a interpretation of him understanding Smith's system? All right. So Bentham's hero. So I'm going to suggest that heroism is a type of sympathy, and I'm going to tell you about Marcus Curtius. So in the early Roman Republic, there's a myth that the Roman Forum, was struck by lightning and a huge gulf opened up in the middle of the Forum. So it prevents normal business, prevents people from going about their normal activity. And so everyone's in a panic. They consult an oracle, and the oracle responds and says that the Romans, in order for the gods to be appeased and to close this gulf, the Romans have to sacrifice what they value most. And so Marcus Curtius solves the riddle, mounts his horse in full armor, rides into the gulf, and the gulf closes over top of him, and everything goes on as normal. So Bentham is working with an idea of this heroic entrepreneur. He relates Curtius directly to the projector, and it's remarked in the literature that this is a particularly glorifying version of the entrepreneur. It stands out among all the representations of the entrepreneur. I think it's kind of ironic, at least in my understanding of Bentham, or the way that he's presented, where I've seen Bentham, is that he's advocating for less intervention here. He's arguing against a rule which would cap interest rates. So he's actually in quite a different role here than what I would normally think of as Bentham's sister. And I think that we can explain this if we start looking at heroism and sympathy by looking at Bentham as a social reformer. He advocates very dramatically throughout his lifetime all of these different social reforms, prison reforms, women's suffrage, voting reforms, public schooling, and tolerance of homosexuality. These are all things that Bentham is known to have advocated. So he's thinking of this in terms of a social reformer. I want to suggest that he's thinking about having a system that's a little bit more dynamic than something that has rules that just can't be violated. So that's the argument I'm trying to move towards. All right, so I want to remind everyone about Smith on fame. The love of just fame or true glory, even for its own sake, is not unworthy even of a life. Right? So we have to make the distinction in Smith between praise and praiseworthiness. In order for my argument to make any sense, I have to convince you that Bentham's working with praiseworthiness and not just praise. And here's the passage that has courteous in it. And it says, those sacrifices of individual to general welfare, which on many occasions are made by third persons against men's will, shall the parties themselves be restrained from making when they do it of their own choice. To tie men neck and heels and throw them into the gulfs of which I have been speaking is altogether out of the question. But if at every gulf a courteous stands mounted and richly ornamented, ready to take the lead, is it for the legislature to pull him away? So this idea that Bentham has is a road that has a bunch of gulfs in it, like Curtius was willing to sacrifice for them. And he's dealing with an idea of progress that is eliminating these holes in the road of progress. So it's really just driven at eliminating errors and not as much at finding good stuff. Trying a bunch of different things in the lottery interpretation where you find new and good things. It's about providing information through identifying errors so that no one has to repeat those same errors in the future. I think that there's a slightly different interpretation if you think of it in that way instead of just as the invention of lottery. So if you're not convinced by the argument within defensive usury, I'm going to lean on Levy's book, 1992, Economic Ideas of Ordinary People, where it briefly discusses the idea of the autoicon in Bentham as a way of sort of stretching out sympathy through into successive generations. So what Jeremy Bentham did is he had himself mummified, like he thought everyone should. And he looked back and he said the Egyptians did this, people made statues, people have monuments, and this is a way that we sort of evaluate their legacy, their heroism, through successive generations. So in Bentham's case, he suggested there be a temple of honor and a temple of fame and a temple of dishonor. And so the autoicon had little wheels on it, and as we change our values, we look back in history, we saw the people and what they stood for, we move them from one temple to the other based on how we evaluate their contribution. So hopefully there would be some settling out. All right.
It's a domain estimation comes in.
So if we think about this as another argument in supporting the idea of utilitarianism with sympathy, or what I would call compassionate utilitarianism, then this gives us a little bit of a different way into Bentham himself than what we think of utilitarianism in total. So again, to build the idea that there's a parallel between what Bentham's doing and the sympathies of Adam Smith, I found this quote by Beyer when he's summarizing that call to Jesus. And he says, men normally are interested to some extent in the happiness of others than themselves. And in exceptional cases are capable of universal benevolence, while fascinating concern for the happiness of mankind at large. And what I'm told here is that Bentham has in mind a philosopher, somebody that's completely committed to mankind at large. And then I'm just contrasting this with the sentence everyone knows, which is comparing the idea that people possess both selfish instincts and benevolence are this universal benevolent possibility. So I think the caricature of Bentham is a little bit more extreme, the fact that people can achieve this universal benevolence, but then Smith is not allowing anyone to be completely selfish. So those are the two differences that I see in those quotes, but I think they're kind of working at the same
Wait,
time.
Michael, you think that the Smith passage is incompatible with the Benson passage?
I was just pointing out a distinction. So I was saying that this one's a little bit more on the upside. It's a lot more positive. You can achieve universal benevolence in rare cases.
But is McKay Smith also thinks that?
Oh, yeah.
Or is it something else?
The emphasis is just different.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so this brings up the idea of, if Bentham's arguing against Smith, what's he arguing against? What's the point that he's driving at? And I think that he's accusing Smith of having having a rule that will provide excessive stability. So if you have a rule that caps interest rates, it prevents people from being able to enter into markets and bring their new ideas and change things, then this would be associated with what he calls the golden age. And I read this as a high water mark or a pinnacle of civilization. And he says the golden age, it is but too true, is not the lot of the generation in which we live, but it is to be found in any part of the track marked out for human existence. It will be found, I trust, not in any part which is past, but in some part in which to come. So you can see the difference in the way that Bentham is talking about his reform and his progressive agenda. So he's imagining something that's going forward. Now, the thing that I think is important is that there's nothing specifically pointed out by Bentham as a goal. There's nothing that I'm seeing in this appeal that says, this is what we need to get to, and you're just providing, and you're getting in the way of that. It's really just the idea that there is a general tendency forward from the point that they're at that point in time. All right, so he imagines what Smith would say if Smith were to respond to his presentation of the projector. So he says, no, I hear you saying, I will not make the projectors for this progress, what's the current state of the world. I'd rather thank the laws, which by fixing the rates of interest have been exercising their diligence in representing the timidity of projectors, preventing their imprudence from making those demarcations from the sum of national prosperity, which would not fail to make having been left free. Here, you conclude, lies the difference between us. What you look upon as the cause of the increase, about which we are both agreed, I look on as an obstacle to it. And what you look upon as an obstacle, I look on as the cause. So I think that you can put this in terms of a rules versus discretion type of argument. So Bentham is actually arguing for something like discretion in this case, having the freedom to interact, to try new things, to increase the wealth of society. So I think he's actually making an argument that's a little bit more interesting than just bringing up the projectors in order to move forward. In fact, the role of projector is coming through here very strongly. And just to point again to the rules, it's this prosperity could actually have increased proportionally greater in some future the more that projectors are freed up in order to do that. So he's not buying the argument that the only thing we have to do is provide stability to prevent misallocation of capital and a reduction of growth because of misallocation of capital. He's actually saying that this is actually the source of the growth and the source of all the progress that we've achieved up to this point.
And that there's been a hidden cost, because it's not like he thinks, right, Bentham is claiming here that, if I read the middle part correctly, that the projectors get the money anyway, but they do it through subterfuge.
Right.
Right, so there's a double cost involved.
I agree. I think that's something that's discussed a little bit more in some of the papers I've read. All right, so what I've called this is compassionate utilitarianism. So this would be an alternative to other types of utilitarianism. I just put these up here. I'm not totally confident about what either one is, but my understanding is that act utilitarianism is just the act evaluated without regard to the system and rules or rules that are set forth to be evaluated. And so I think I want to say that this is different than these other types of utilitarianism and interpretations. So we have to be a little bit more careful with them than at least I was before I started reading this. So what do we get when we look at Bentham and Smith in this type of way? Bentham arguing against the intervention, and Smith arguing for something that's going to provide stability. I think it's a bit reversed from the way, what I expected to read before I read this. Bentham is normally presented as an advocate of the civil code, making rules about discretion. So I have to reconcile this. I have to figure out why Bentham is seen this way in the reading of the defense usury. This doesn't seem to hold. I definitely want to bring out the importance of pulling standards in another direction. So throughout Bentham's career, he's an advocate of reform. In Not Following Jesus, he demonstrates his acceptance of standards that vary from place to place and that are not necessarily something that you can make rules about. They just happen. And then Bentham is progressive, but without a particular end in mind. So the idea of constructivists, which Bentham gets accused of, would be that they have a particular end in mind and are trying to make rules in order to achieve that end. I think that this point about Smith embracing stability needs to be addressed. So if Smith is providing a rule which provides for a greater amount of stability, is he really worried that the social order is inherently fragile? And if so, under what conditions is it fragile? What kind of things can we play around with and muck about with at the margin? And what kind of things can't be messed with or toyed with because the social order will collapse? So I've mentioned this a little bit, the difference between Bentham and, presenting Bentham as an evolutionary thinker rather than a constructivist thinker, that would challenge the literature on Bentham. Bentham, at least in this essay, has to be understood without the traditional act of totalitarianism and this note about universal benevolence. So both, in conclusion, both thinkers are more dynamic than typical summaries of their thought. So we have to at least think about Bentham with sympathy or working within Smith's system. And we have to think about maybe some areas where Smith is taking on rules that would be pretty static or preserving some sort of stability. More attention needs to be paid to this sympathy, and then if that's true, if I can convince you that there's sympathy in Bentham utilitarianism, then I'm going to have to make a distinction between Bentham and his later followers, which are clearly not working with that type of system. Thank you very much.
Questions, comments, or
Yeah. In the stuff, the projectors, I think that there is a context which is really interesting for the work we're taking, which is, for example, what was going on before in France. Your law, remember, this is all about the luxury debate, corruption and social progress. The whole corruption debate has an influence on how Smith, for example, thought about projectors. So you have the South Mississippi bubble, the relationship to the stock market. It's a little bit like the financial crisis today. So I think, that probably thinking a little bit about that context would help in order to understand the role of the projectors and how Smith would define stability, talking about projectors and all that. It's just a small comment.
So just to follow up, do you think that would be something that he did for his audience or something that he did as a part of his system?
No, I think he did it actually. I think he was taking, in Wealth of Nations, when you talk about projectors, probably he was reflecting this whole tradition or the remnants of this corruption debate, which was changing towards a sort of political economy, new theory, if you want. That's my point. I don't know.
I'm really glad that you're reopening the Smith-Bentham debate. I think it's a really great idea, Michael, that you're reopening the Smith-Bentham debate, and I think there's been a lot of sort of easy arguments, and you're showing it's much more complicated. Could you go back to this sort of dialogue between them? So Bentham is saying to Smith that the debate between them is a causal debate. an empirical debate. Namely, what you think is the effect, I think is the cause. What you think is the cause, I think is the effect. But now it's actually not entirely clear to me what it is in fact, what Bentham thinks really is the causal difference. Because it looks like Bentham is saying, among other things, hey, it's entrepreneurship that's the cause of wealth. But if I follow your reading, it's not merely entrepreneurship, that the fact that it's a different take on what entrepreneurship is, but also a different view about what social, two things, both where they are, how stable the system is that they've inherited, and what the proper, in George Mason language, the constitutional framework is that's governing that system. So there are free claims, I take it on your account, that make Bentham and Smith differ about free empirical facts that go into the cause and effect relationship. Now, what I'm leaving aside sympathy for a second, because I think that really adds an extra layer of confusion that may well be there, but I just want to just do that. Now, what I'm not sure on what you think is that Bentham thinks all three of these things are part of the cause and effect relationship, or if you think it's only the entrepreneurship, given further background assumptions that they may or may not share. So what would be very helpful for me is if you could hash out how you think Bentham thinks that Smith and he are differing about what the cause and effect is.
Yeah. My reading of Bentham, earlier in the letter, there's a passage that says, this is not to take anything away from your book. I learned everything I know about political economy from you. And I kind of assumed that Bentham is working within Smith's system and is just trying to tease apart this one particular essence. The reason that he focuses so much on this is because he sees it as a contradiction to the whole. I'm not sure that Smith sees it as a contradiction.
But what is so I think the straightforward reading of this is that Bentham thinks that entrepreneurs or projectors make a positive net contribution. But I take it that for your reading, it also requires that they have subtly different views about where they are in time and what the nature of the political constitutional framework is. And what I'm wondering is if you have evidence that Bentham saw it like that too, or if that's what you're adding to the letter to Usury to make clear to us.
Is that the constitutional framework?
Yes.
So there's a difference in the government of Bentham's time versus the...
No, I thought that your claim is that they have different views about the nature of stability of the order, and that they also have a difference of opinion about what the right framework is that can improve the order.
Okay.
And then we have a further claim, namely the value of entrepreneurship for prosperity. And it seems to me textually the easiest claim to make is the claim about the value of entrepreneurship. And the two earlier claims are very interesting, but it's harder for me to see exactly how you're textually getting at that Bentham, given your own background presumption that he's working within the Smith system, how you can actually make Bentham say what you want him to be saying. I hope that was clear and not more confusing.
Yeah, so the idea of stability is a claim that there are certain things that are likely to fall apart in the natural order or the order that would emerge without intervention. Mm-hmm. So Smith is making an exception for the capital markets. And the claim is that when people act without rules in the capital markets, they're going to have external effects on other people. And so I think Bentham is taking that assumption and saying, yes, the people act and they have interactions with other people, but it's truly endogenous with sympathy rather than exogenous, that some sort of externality. So the sympathy has positive and negative benefits, but it works within a system that's endogenizing those relationships.
On the other side, you may want to continue that with Jonathan.
It's a really interesting topic and a good paper. I haven't read your paper, but I'm just looking at your slideshow. It seems like you started with the word order in the title, but you ended up with the word stability.
Yes.
So in your mind, are those the same? Because in my mind, they're really not the same. And I see Smith envisioning perhaps order, but order could have progress with the order and change and evolution and be very orderly. But you could be stabilized at a point of, you know, something terrible. So I don't see Smith associating Smith with stability so much as I see associating him with the word order, or what order might imply.
Yeah, taking your comments about the difference in two words, I would definitely prefer order instead of stability. So,
David.
Well, this is fun, of course. But let me, Leon, I think Leon's query, I think is really helpful. And that is that the question is, why does when Jim Buchanan talks about locking down the money system, why does he look at well-informed people like socialism? Why does that?
Just hang on, just for Doug and Al's benefit, let me say that Kevin Hoover from Duke accused Jim Buchanan of sounding like a socialist on Friday.
Since he was
Must be ordered.
put into a slippery slope where he ended up saying that it would be okay to nationalize the entire financial
Yes.
system.
So it was good fun. Go ahead.
And I think that there is a tradition in the classical liberal tradition which worries a lot about stability. And it's some of it's located in finance. And one of the great lines people know is that when Smith talks about paper money, he talks about it as sort of a wagon way through the air. And one of the great pictures from the 1720 great year of great temporal folly is John Law, the inventor of managed money, in a wagon in the air. And so that's the 1720 is actually cited in Mandeville's Charity School, which is the text the lecture depends on so much. And so there's this tradition. There's this tradition of worries about financial stability mucking up the system. And it's starting to look like that people are commenting on or making reference to this 1720 Dutch portfolio on sort of on the bubble economy. And so if we've sort of forgotten about the bubble economy, these guys haven't, then we may miss some of these things. And so I think that I think that these sort of questions about stability and order, and why do people like, it's not just Jim, it's Henry Simons. Why do people think that Henry Simons is a socialist? It's because he wants to lock down money, because he's worried about instability propagating from finance. If you don't see that debate, then there's a whole bunch of things that I think they get wrong.
yeah, the idea that having a financial sector is a source of instability has to be controlled is really interesting.
Do you have any comments? Yes, Stefan.
I'm
I'm not sure if it fits into our Adam Smith session, but
Given the talk we had yesterday by David Levy, everything fits better. We're getting near the end of the institute, so I start making wisecracks.
With a unique target, yes.
Go ahead.
so on your final slide you had something saying about the Bentham myths, and I was thinking if 20th century economists who a Bentham myth might be, and what was coming up in my mind is probably Mises. So my question is, although it's certainly far-fetched perhaps, if what you are saying about Bentham and sympathy, if that might have some relevance to Mises.
Could you give me a little bit more about his argument?
Pardon?
Mises' argument about that? Tell me what you were thinking.
Well, I'm not sure, but some people accuse Mises of being hard-hearted, absolutely using sympathy, not having reading Mises would not mean that. So it was just coming up in my mind that he's so in favor of what Bentham is saying that I was just thinking to combine it with your talk, but.
David, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful, because that it's very clear. Mises is almost willing to call himself a cosmopolitan in liberalism, and so that this utilitarianism, especially when it's in the negative version, we want to get rid of poverty, we want to get rid of premature mortality, we want to get rid of all these awful things as utilitarians. And so the sort of people are sort of, if you get Bentham wrong, then you're going to get the Benthamites wrong, especially you get somebody like Mises, who's a very careful reader. He's very careful. And so Mises has read Bentham very carefully, and other folks haven't, then we're going to get Mises wrong as a concept.
Why don't we, sorry,
Because I don't know.
Mika?
For Mises, doesn't, I mean, he mentioned sympathy probably 2 or 3 times in all his writings. Even though a friend of him, who was Max Scherer, had written a book, The Meaning and Understanding of Sympathy. And I mean, in that tradition, not even Hayek referred to sympathy in the way Smith understood it. For Hayek, I think, and for Mises, sympathy was only a sort of reciprocity process, and that's it. It was an exchange. So, I mean, that was
I was thinking about Mises on social policy, saying that a community has the capability, which might implicitly mean sympathy, to solve its mutual problems by itself, so not needing an exterior influence to solve their problems. So that was what was coming up with in my mind.
Why don't we take a short break and come back and start again at 2 o'clock.